By 1965, Harlem had changed, but one thing remained constant. The police were always watching. Bumpy Johnson noticed it first in small ways. Officers sitting in unmarked cars on his street, the same faces appearing wherever he went. Photographers with long lenses capturing every movement. He was 68 years old now, decades removed from his war with Dutch Schultz. Most of his criminal activities were behind him. Yet the New York Police Department watched him like he was public enemy number one. "They're documenting everything," said James, a young activist who'd become Bumpy's friend. "Every person you meet, every place you go. They're building files on the entire neighborhood." Bumpy stood at his window, watching two officers in a parked car across the street. They weren't even hiding anymore. The surveillance had become blatant, aggressive, insulting. "It's not just me they're watching," Bumpy said quietly. "It's everyone. Ministers, teachers, shop owners. Anyone who speaks up for civil rights gets followed, photographed, documented." This was the new battleground. Not gangsters fighting over territory, but citizens fighting for basic dignity. The police treated Harlem like an occupied territory, not an American neighborhood. Bumpy had fought many battles in his life. This would be his most important and his last great stand. The surveillance of Harlem wasn't new, but by 1965 it had reached unprecedented levels. The NYPD's Bureau of Special Services and Investigations, BOSSI, had files on thousands of Harlem residents. Civil rights activists were photographed at rallies. Community leaders were followed home. Even church gatherings were monitored for subversive activity. Bumpy Johnson's file was particularly thick. Despite his reduced criminal activity, police documented his every move, who he talked to, where he ate, what meetings he attended. The surveillance was constant and humiliating. "They're trying to intimidate us into silence," explained Malcolm X during one of their conversations. Malcolm himself was heavily surveilled by multiple agencies. Bumpy understood the strategy perfectly. He'd used surveillance himself in his numbers operations. Knowledge was power. But this was different. This was the government treating citizens like enemies. The breaking point came on a cold February morning. Bumpy was having coffee at a local diner when he noticed a young officer photographing him through the window. The officer wasn't even pretending to be discreet. He wanted Bumpy to see, wanted him to feel watched. "Enough," Bumpy said quietly. He'd spent his life fighting for Harlem's dignity. He'd battled Dutch Schultz, survived prison, built community systems. Now, in what might be his final fight, he would challenge the police state itself. The question was how. Bumpy called a meeting at his apartment. Not criminals this time, but community activists, civil rights leaders, concerned citizens. 20 people crowded into his living room, united by frustration. "We need to make a statement," Bumpy began. "Something that gets attention. Something that shows we won't accept being treated like criminals in our own neighborhood." "We've tried protests," said Reverend Williams. "They ignore us or arrest us." "We've tried petitions," added Sarah, a teacher. "They file them and forget them." "We've tried working with politicians," said James. "They promise change and deliver nothing." Bumpy nodded. He'd expected this. Traditional methods weren't working because the system was designed to absorb and deflect protest. They needed something different, something that couldn't be ignored. "What if we went to them?" Bumpy suggested. "Not asking for meetings, not requesting audiences. What if we simply occupied their space until they listened?" The room went quiet. It was a radical idea, a sit-down strike at a police station. Civil disobedience directed at the very institution conducting the surveillance. "They'll arrest us," someone pointed out. "Probably," Bumpy agreed. "But arrests mean attention. Arrests mean news coverage. Arrests mean the city has to acknowledge what's happening in Harlem." It was risky. It would anger authorities. People could get hurt. But after years of being watched, followed, and documented, maybe confrontation was the only option left. "I'm in," said James immediately. One by one, others agreed. Bumpy's plan wasn't created in a vacuum. It drew from a long history of civil disobedience. He'd watched the Montgomery bus boycott succeed through persistent nonviolent resistance. He'd seen lunch counter sit-ins force change across the South. He'd observed how Gandhi had used passive resistance to challenge British imperialism. The powerful expect violence, Bumpy explained to his younger allies. They're prepared for riots, for fights, for reasons to use force. What they're not prepared for is calm, persistent, nonviolent occupation. This was remarkable coming from Bumpy Johnson, a man who'd built his reputation on strategic use of force when necessary. But he understood something important. The right tactic depended on the situation. Fighting Dutch Schultz required different methods than fighting institutional police surveillance. "You're talking about getting arrested without fighting back?" asked Marcus, a young man who'd grown up hearing stories of Bumpy's toughness. "I'm talking about making them arrest us for doing nothing wrong," Bumpy corrected. "We're not breaking windows or threatening anyone. We're sitting peacefully in a public building, demanding they stop treating us like criminals. If they arrest us for that, they prove our point." It was sophisticated political theater, using the system's own violence against it, and it required the kind of courage that had nothing to do with physical strength. "This is different from what you've done before," observed Reverend Williams. Bumpy nodded. "Different times require different methods. I fought gangsters with strategy. We'll fight injustice with dignity." Not all police stations were equal. Bumpy and his core group spent days studying which location would make the strongest statement. The 28th Precinct on West 123rd Street seemed perfect. It was central to Harlem, well known to residents, and notorious for aggressive policing. Officers from this station conducted most of the surveillance. This station's files contained the detailed records on community members. "It's also the precinct with the most complaints," noted James, who'd been researching. "Excessive force, false arrests, harassment. The community has been asking for accountability for years." Bumpy visited the station several times, observing the layout. The main lobby was public space. Citizens came and went, filing reports, asking questions. There was a waiting area with benches. It was perfect for a sit-down strike. "We go on a weekday morning," Bumpy decided. "Maximum visibility. We sit peacefully in the lobby. We don't block doors or interfere with operations. We just refuse to leave until they agree to meet with us about the surveillance." "What are our specific demands?" asked Sarah. Bumpy had thought about this carefully. 3 demands. First, end blanket surveillance of law-abiding Harlem residents. Second, destroy files on people not charged with crimes. Third, establish civilian oversight of surveillance activities. They were reasonable demands, asking only for basic civil liberties. That was intentional. The more reasonable they appeared, the more unreasonable police resistance would look. "When do we do this?" Reverend Williams asked. Bumpy looked around the room at the determined faces. "Next Tuesday, February 23, 1965. The next few days were crucial. They needed enough people to make an impact, but not so many that the action became chaotic. Bumpy personally visited community leaders explaining the plan. Some were supportive immediately. Others worried about backlash. A few refused to participate but promised not to interfere. "This could make things worse," warned one minister. "Police might increase surveillance as punishment. Or we might force change," Bumpy replied. "Either way, we stop accepting the situation as normal." Word spread carefully through Harlem, not through public announcements. They didn't want police to prepare massive force, but through personal conversations, trusted networks, community connections built over decades. James organized the younger activists, making sure everyone understood nonviolence was essential. "If police push you, don't push back. If they insult you, don't respond. Our strength is in our calm, not our anger." Sarah coordinated with local press. She couldn't guarantee coverage, but she made sure reporters knew something significant was planned. Civil rights leaders conducting peaceful protest at police station, she told a sympathetic journalist. Tuesday morning, Bumpy spent time talking with older residents, people who remembered when police were respectful, when Harlem wasn't treated like enemy territory. Their support mattered. This wasn't just young radicals causing trouble. This was the community standing together. By Monday night, everything was ready. 30 people had committed to participate. Others with support from outside. The press was alerted. The demands were clear. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. Tuesday, February 23, 1965, dawned cold and clear. Bumpy woke at 5 a.m., his body aching with age but his mind sharp with purpose. He dressed carefully, a good suit, clean shirt, polished shoes. This wasn't a criminal action. This was citizenship in action. Appearance mattered. By 7:30, the group began gathering 2 blocks from the 28th Precinct. 30 people ranging from teenagers to elderly residents. Some were nervous, others looked determined. All understood what they were about to do. Remember, Bumpy addressed them one final time. We're not angry protesters. We're concerned citizens requesting a meeting. We sit peacefully. We speak respectfully. We stay calm no matter what happens. He looked at each person. If you want to leave now, no shame. This could mean arrest, could mean police records, could mean trouble. I won't think less of anyone who decides this isn't for them. Nobody left. At 8 a.m., they walked together toward the precinct. 30 people moving with quiet purpose down 123rd Street. A few neighbors watched from windows. Some joined the march. By the time they reached the station, the group had grown to 40. The desk sergeant looked up in surprise as they filed in. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Bumpy said politely. "We'd like to speak with the precinct commander about surveillance policies in Harlem." "You need to make an appointment?" "We've tried that. We're making an appointment now. We'll wait right here." And with that, Bumpy sat down on the lobby bench. One by one, the others sat too. The desk sergeant stared at them, uncertain. This wasn't a riot. Nobody was threatening anyone. They were just sitting. "You can't all wait here," he said finally. "We're in a public building," Bumpy replied calmly. "We're not blocking anything. We're waiting to speak with your commander. He's not available." "Then we'll wait until he is." The sergeant picked up his phone, speaking quietly into it. Within minutes, a lieutenant appeared, a tall man with suspicious eyes and a tight jaw. "Mr. Johnson," the lieutenant said, recognizing Bumpy immediately. Of course he did. They had thick files on everyone present. "What's this about?" "We'd like to discuss the surveillance of Harlem residents," Bumpy replied. "We believe it's excessive, unconstitutional, and needs to stop. That's not your concern. It's entirely our concern. We're the ones being watched." The lieutenant's face hardened. "If you don't leave voluntarily, you'll be removed." "We're not leaving until we speak with the commander." For a long moment, the lieutenant just stared. He'd expected anger, expected confrontation he could respond to with force. Instead, he faced calm, polite insistence. "You're trespassing," he tried. "We're sitting in a public building during business hours," James spoke up. "That's not trespassing." The lieutenant turned and walked back into the station. Through the glass, they could see him making phone calls, talking urgently to other officers. Bumpy glanced at his watch. 8:15. They'd been there 15 minutes. It was going to be a long day, but they were ready. By 9 a.m., news of the sit-down strike had spread through Harlem. People began gathering outside the precinct, not joining the sit-in. That required specific commitment, but showing support. 50 people became 100. 100 became 200. Inside, the police were getting nervous. The lieutenant reappeared with reinforcements, 6 officers who lined up behind the desk, trying to look intimidating. "Last chance to leave peacefully," the lieutenant announced. Bumpy didn't move. "We're being peaceful. We just want a meeting." "You're disrupting police operations." "We're sitting quietly. Your operations continue around us." It was true. Citizens were still coming in to file reports, ask questions, conduct business. The sit-in participants simply sat on the benches, not interfering with anything. Outside, a television crew arrived. Sarah's press contacts had worked. Channel 7 News set up cameras, interviewing people in the crowd. "Why are you here?" a reporter asked an elderly woman. "Because I'm tired of being treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood," she replied. "I taught school for 40 years. Now police follow me like I'm dangerous. These people inside are doing what needs to be done." The police noticed the cameras. This changed everything. What happened next would be broadcast across New York. The lieutenant made another phone call. Through the glass, they could see him getting orders. His expression suggested he wasn't happy about them. Finally, he returned to the lobby. "The commander will see 3 representatives. Not everyone, 3. Bumpy, James, and Reverend Williams stood. "The others stay here," the lieutenant added. "No more sitting." "They stay sitting," Bumpy replied. "That's the point." The standoff continued. At 10 a.m., Police Commander Charles Murphy finally appeared. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with the confident bearing of someone used to authority being obeyed without question. "Mr. Johnson," he said, trying to sound friendly, but achieving only condescension. "This is unnecessary. We can discuss your concerns through proper channels." "We've tried proper channels," Bumpy replied. "We've written letters, made complaints, requested meetings. We get ignored or dismissed. So we're here, waiting for the conversation you've been avoiding." Murphy's jaw tightened. "You're forcing my hand. I'll have to arrest everyone here for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "We're not being disorderly. We're sitting quietly in a public building. You're disrupting police business." "Your business continues." Bumpy gestured around the lobby. Other citizens were filing reports. Officers were moving through. Operations continued. "We're just sitting, waiting, like any citizen waiting for service." Murphy looked at the cameras outside, at the growing crowd, at the calm, determined faces inside. This wasn't going how he'd expected. "What exactly do you want?" he asked finally. Bumpy saw the opening. 3 things. End blanket surveillance of law-abiding Harlem residents. Destroy files on people not charged with crimes. Establish civilian oversight of surveillance activities. Impossible. We need surveillance for crime prevention. You need targeted surveillance based on actual suspicious activity. Bumpy corrected. Not blanket documentation of everyone who attends a civil rights meeting or speaks about equality. Murphy shook his head. "I don't have authority to make those changes." "Then we'll wait while you contact someone who does." The commander's face turned red. Nobody talked to him like this, especially not a former criminal from Harlem. Hours passed. The sit-in participants remained on the benches, calm and patient. Outside, the crowd grew larger, now over 300 people supporting the action. Police brought in chairs, sitting across from the protesters in a strange standoff. Neither side moved, neither side spoke much. It was a battle of wills, conducted in complete silence. At noon, supporters outside passed food through the windows. Sandwiches, water, coffee. The sit-in participants ate while sitting, still refusing to leave. "You must be uncomfortable," an officer said to an elderly woman named Dorothy. "I've been uncomfortable for years being watched like a criminal," she replied. "This discomfort has purpose." The officer had no response. Inside the station, normal business continued awkwardly around them. Citizens came to file reports, looking curiously at the silent people sitting on benches. Some asked what was happening. When they learned, many expressed support. "About time somebody did something," said one man filing a stolen car report. "Police in this neighborhood act like we're all criminals." At 2 p.m., Commander Murphy returned. He looked tired and frustrated. "I've contacted the police commissioner's office," he said. "They're willing to meet with you tomorrow to discuss your concerns." "We'll be here tomorrow too," Bumpy replied. "Right here, waiting, until those meetings produce actual change." Murphy's expression darkened. "You can't occupy this station indefinitely. We'll stay as long as necessary. The commander looked at the cameras still rolling outside, at the massive crowd, at the calm determination of the protesters. Arresting them would create martyrs. Ignoring them was no longer possible. He was trapped, and he knew it. By 3 p.m., every major New York news outlet had reporters at the scene. This was no longer just a local story. It was becoming a symbol of larger civil rights tensions. Reporters managed to get inside briefly, interviewing the sit-in participants. "Mr. Johnson, you have a criminal history," one reporter noted. "Does that undermine your credibility on police issues?" Bumpy looked at the camera calmly. "I've made mistakes. Paid for them too. But I've also lived in Harlem for decades. I know what it means to be watched constantly, and I know the difference between legitimate law enforcement and harassment. What's happening here is harassment. What do you hope to accomplish?" "Dignity," Bumpy replied simply. "We want to be treated like citizens, not suspects. We want police who protect us, not police who treat us like enemies. That's what every American deserves." It was powerful television. Here was a man with a complicated past, sitting peacefully in a police station, articulating basic civil rights principles with quiet conviction. Other participants were interviewed too. Teachers, ministers, students, working people, all with the same message: surveillance had gone too far. "I've taught in Harlem for 30 years, Sarah told cameras. Never been arrested, never committed a crime. But police have a file on me because I attended a civil rights rally. That's not public safety. That's oppression." The interviews aired on evening news broadcasts across New York. Public opinion began shifting. What had seemed like a radical action started looking like reasonable citizens demanding basic respect. By 6 p.m., 3 city council members had arrived at the precinct, expressing support for the protesters' demands. Commander Murphy was losing control of the narrative. As darkness fell, the situation reached a critical point. The sit-in participants had been there 10 hours. They were tired, uncomfortable, but still determined. Police commanders faced a choice: allow them to stay overnight or forcibly remove them. Either option carried risks. At 7 p.m., a representative from the mayor's office arrived, a young aide who looked overwhelmed by the situation. "The mayor is aware of your protest," he told Bumpy. "He wants to assure you that your concerns are being taken seriously." "Then stop the surveillance," Bumpy replied. "It's not that simple. There are procedures, policies, legal considerations. It's exactly that simple. You either respect our rights or you don't." The aide looked helpless. "I'm authorized to offer you a meeting next week with the police commissioner." "We've been offered meetings before. They lead nowhere. We're staying." Outside, supporters had set up for a long night. Someone brought a portable heater. Others organized shifts so people could take breaks. A minister led the crowd in freedom songs. Inside, police brought in cots. "You can't sleep on the benches," an officer explained, almost apologetically. "It's against regulations." "We're not sleeping," Bumpy said. "We're waiting." But his body betrayed him. At 68, staying awake indefinitely wasn't possible. Around 10 p.m., despite his determination, Bumpy dozed on the bench. When he woke at midnight, everyone else was still there. Still sitting, still waiting. The long night continued. At 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, after 22 hours of occupation, Police Commissioner Vincent Broderick himself arrived at the precinct. Broderick was a careful politician who understood public relations. He saw immediately that this situation needed resolution, not confrontation. "Mr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand, "I'm here to listen." They met in a private office: Bumpy, James, Reverend Williams, and Commissioner Broderick. The conversation was frank. "You're asking me to dismantle a system designed to prevent crime," Broderick began. "We're asking you to dismantle a system designed to intimidate citizens," Bumpy corrected. "There's a difference. Investigate actual criminals, fine. But photographing everyone at a civil rights rally? Following ministers home from church? That's not crime prevention. That's political surveillance." We have to know what's happening in the communities we serve. You could try talking to us like human beings instead of photographing us like criminals." The conversation went on for 2 hours. Broderick tried various arguments: public safety, crime statistics, departmental procedures. Bumpy countered each one with examples of surveillance overreach. Finally, Broderick made a proposal. "I'll form a committee to review surveillance policies. Community representatives will be included. We'll develop new guidelines within 60 days." "That's a start," Bumpy said. "What about the files on people not charged with crimes?" "We'll review them. Files without legitimate law enforcement purpose will be destroyed." "Civilian oversight?" Broderick hesitated. "That's beyond my authority, but I'll recommend it to the city council." It wasn't everything, but it was progress. Real, concrete progress. Bumpy looked at James and Reverend Williams. They nodded slightly. "We'll end the sit-in," Bumpy said. "But we'll be watching. If the committee doesn't materialize, if nothing changes, we'll be back." At 9 a.m. Wednesday, 25 hours after it began, the sit-in ended. Bumpy stood in the precinct lobby and addressed the 30 people who'd stayed the entire time. "We did it. We forced them to listen. We got commitments for change. That's what dignity looks like, standing firm until you're respected." They walked out together to cheers from the crowd outside. Hundreds of people had maintained vigil through the night. Now they celebrated as the protesters emerged, tired but triumphant. News cameras captured everything: the exhausted but dignified protesters, the massive crowd support, the victory against institutional surveillance. "How do you feel, Mr. Johnson?" a reporter asked. Bumpy paused, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "I feel like an American citizen who stood up for his rights. That's all any of us wanted, to be treated like we belong in this country." The crowd erupted in applause, but Bumpy could barely stand. 25 hours of sitting had taken a toll on his aging body. James and Reverend Williams supported him as they walked through the crowd. "You need rest," James said with concern. "I need to make sure this matters," Bumpy replied. "Victory means nothing if it doesn't lead to change." They helped him home. By the time Bumpy reached his apartment, his legs could barely carry him. He collapsed into his chair, every muscle screaming, but his mind was clear. They'd done something remarkable. A group of ordinary citizens had forced one of America's largest police departments to acknowledge civil rights concerns. It was the kind of victory that couldn't be measured in money or territory, only in dignity reclaimed. And that made it the most important victory of Bumpy Johnson's long, complicated life. The next few days were chaotic. News of the sit-in spread nationally. Civil rights leaders praised the action. Others criticized it as radical. Bumpy spent Thursday resting, but by Friday he was back in action, meeting with community leaders to plan next steps. Commissioner Broderick made promises, he told a gathering at Abyssinian Baptist Church. "Our job is to make sure he keeps them. We need to organize, stay vigilant, stay ready to act again if necessary." They formed the Harlem Community Oversight Committee, citizens who would monitor police behavior, document surveillance, and advocate for the policy changes Broderick had promised. "This isn't over," Bumpy emphasized. "One sit-in doesn't fix decades of injustice, but it starts a conversation. It shows we're not powerless." Not everyone was supportive. Some police officers felt betrayed, viewing the sit-in as an attack on law enforcement. Others in Harlem worried about retaliation. "Police might crack down harder now," warned one shop owner. "Make life difficult for everyone." "Then we document it," Bumpy replied. "We expose it. We use the same surveillance tactics against them: cameras, records, witnesses. We become the ones watching." It was a revolutionary idea: citizens monitoring police instead of just accepting being monitored. Meanwhile, true to his word, Commissioner Broderick formed the Policy Review Committee. He appointed Lieutenant Thomas Harrison to chair it and included 3 community representatives: Bumpy Johnson, Reverend Williams, and Sarah the teacher. The first meeting was scheduled for March 15th. Until then, everyone waited to see if real change was possible. The Policy Review Committee's first meeting took place in a city government building in Lower Manhattan. The contrast with Harlem was stark. Gleaming offices, polished floors, people in expensive suits. Bumpy arrived in his best suit, determined to be taken seriously. James accompanied him, along with several other community representatives. Lieutenant Harrison chaired the meeting with professional courtesy. "Our goal is to develop surveillance guidelines that balance public safety with civil liberties," he began. For the next 2 hours, they discussed specifics. When was surveillance justified? What documentation was appropriate? How long should files be kept? The police representatives argued for maximum flexibility. "We need to be able to respond to emerging threats," one captain insisted. "And we need to know you're not creating threats out of legitimate political activity," Bumpy countered. "Attending a civil rights rally isn't a threat. Speaking about equality isn't a threat. Those activities need protection, not surveillance." The debate was intense but productive. Unlike previous attempts at dialogue, the police representatives seemed to actually listen. The sit-in had created pressure they couldn't ignore. Sarah proposed specific language. "Surveillance shall be based on specific articulable facts indicating criminal activity or imminent threats to public safety. Political beliefs, civil rights advocacy, or community organizing shall not constitute grounds for surveillance." "That's too restrictive," argued a police lawyer. "That's constitutional," Sarah replied. "First Amendment protects political speech and assembly. You can't surveil people for exercising constitutional rights." Lieutenant Harrison took notes on everything. "We'll draft proposed guidelines based on this discussion," he said. "Next meeting in 2 weeks to review them." It was progress. Slow, frustrating, but real. As they left, James asked Bumpy, "Do you trust them?" Bumpy shook his head. "I trust that we made them pay attention. Trust is earned slowly." On February 21st, just 2 days before the sit-in would have been its 1-month anniversary, Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. The news devastated the community. Malcolm had been one of Harlem's most powerful voices, someone who demanded dignity and respect without compromise. Bumpy attended the funeral, grieving not just a friend, but a fellow warrior. Malcolm had been heavily surveilled by police, by the FBI, by multiple agencies. Some wondered if the constant surveillance had contributed to the climate that led to his death. "They watched him constantly," Bumpy said at a community gathering after the funeral. "Documented every speech, every meeting, every conversation. But they didn't protect him when it mattered." Malcolm's assassination gave new urgency to their work on surveillance reform. The Policy Review Committee's next meeting took on a somber tone. "Malcolm X was under constant surveillance," Bumpy said directly. "Multiple agencies watched him. Yet those same agencies failed to prevent his murder. That tells you what surveillance is really about. Not protection, but control." The police representatives had no good answer. The point was made. Lieutenant Harrison looked uncomfortable but determined. "Let's focus on the guidelines. The best way to honor Malcolm is to create better policies." They worked through the proposed language. Much of it was acceptable, requiring specific evidence before surveillance, limiting file retention, establishing review procedures. But they disagreed on civilian oversight. Police wanted internal review only. Community representatives demanded external accountability. "We don't trust you to police yourselves," Bumpy said bluntly. "History gives us no reason to trust that." The issue remained unresolved. As weeks passed, community pressure continued. The Harlem Oversight Committee documented every instance of questionable police behavior. A minister was followed after speaking at a rally, documented and reported. A student was photographed at a protest, documented and reported. An organizer was questioned without cause, documented and reported. They built their own files, evidence of ongoing surveillance despite the supposed reform process. "We're creating accountability," James explained at a training session. "Every time they watch us inappropriately, we record it. We become our own witnesses." The documentation served two purposes. First, it provided evidence if the committee process failed. Second, it showed police they were being watched too, a reversal of the surveillance dynamic. Commissioner Broderick received weekly reports of the documented incidents. The pressure was constant. Meanwhile, Bumpy's health was deteriorating. The sit-in had taken a toll his aging body couldn't fully recover from. He tired more easily, moved more slowly. But his mind remained sharp, and his determination stronger than ever. "You should rest," urged his doctor. "I'll rest when this is finished," Bumpy replied. By April, the Policy Review Committee had met 5 times. They'd made progress on most issues but remained deadlocked on civilian oversight. "We need external review," Bumpy insisted at the 5th meeting. "A board of citizens who can investigate complaints and recommend discipline." "That undermines command structure," argued a police captain. "That provides accountability," Bumpy corrected. Lieutenant Harrison proposed a compromise, a civilian advisory board with review powers but not disciplinary authority. They could investigate and recommend, but final decisions remained with police commanders. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. "We'll accept it temporarily," Bumpy said, "but we reserve the right to push for full civilian oversight later." The committee finally had an agreement. On May 12, 1965, Police Commissioner Broderick announced the new surveillance guidelines at a press conference. Bumpy Johnson and other community representatives stood beside him. The new policies included: surveillance required specific articulable evidence of criminal activity, political activity and civil rights advocacy were explicitly protected. Files on individuals not charged with crimes would be reviewed and destroyed if not justified. A civilian advisory board would review complaints about surveillance. Annual reports on surveillance activities would be made public. These guidelines represent a new relationship between police and the communities we serve, Broderick announced. They protect both public safety and civil liberties. Reporters asked Bumpy for his reaction. "It's a start," he said carefully. "Not perfect, but progress. Our job now is to make sure these policies are actually implemented, not just written on paper." He was right to be cautious. Policies meant nothing without enforcement. The Harlem Oversight Committee immediately began monitoring implementation. They reviewed cases, investigated complaints, tested whether police actually followed the new guidelines. Some officers resisted. Old habits died hard. But the new policies gave citizens tools to challenge surveillance, and the sit-in had shown they were willing to use dramatic action if necessary. Slowly, behavior began to change. Surveillance became more targeted, less blanket, files were reviewed and many destroyed. The Civilian Advisory Board began hearing cases. It wasn't perfect. Problems continued. But there was measurable improvement, and that meant the sit-in had achieved something real. "You changed the system," James told Bumpy one evening. Bumpy shook his head. "We pushed it. The system only changes when people push. That's the lesson. Citizens have power if they're willing to use it." News of Harlem's success spread to other cities. Community groups in Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Detroit began organizing their own actions, challenging police surveillance. Bumpy became an unlikely civil rights icon. This former gangster, this man with a criminal history, had shown how ordinary citizens could force institutional change through peaceful resistance. He received invitations to speak across the country. Most he declined. His health wouldn't allow extensive travel. But he made a few key appearances, sharing the lessons of the Harlem sit-in. "The powerful never give up power voluntarily," he told an audience in Chicago. "You have to make them, not with violence, not with destruction, but with persistent, dignified, nonviolent pressure. Make them acknowledge you. Make them respond to you. Force the conversation they'd rather avoid." Civil rights leaders incorporated his tactics into broader strategies. The sit-in model, peaceful occupation until demands were met, became a template for challenging institutional injustice. "You've contributed something important to the movement," Reverend Williams told him. Bumpy was uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed doing. Protecting my community, that's what I've always done." But it was more than that. Bumpy had shown how criminal justice reform could be achieved through community organizing. How police accountability could be demanded, not just requested. How ordinary citizens had power if they understood how to use it. His legacy was becoming complicated. Not just the gangster who fought Dutch Schultz, but the activist who fought police surveillance. Both sides of his life, woven together into something uniquely valuable. History would remember both versions of Bumpy Johnson. And maybe that was appropriate for such a complex man. The victory came with personal costs. Police who resented the new guidelines blamed Bumpy for undermining law enforcement. He received threats. His apartment was watched more closely than ever. Officers looked for any reason to arrest him on old charges. "They're waiting for you to make a mistake," James warned. Bumpy smiled grimly. "I've been watched my whole life. I'm used to it." But the stress affected his health. His doctor warned that his heart was weakening, that he needed to reduce activity and stress. Instead, Bumpy increased his involvement in community work. He attended every oversight committee meeting, every policy review, every training session for citizens learning to document police behavior. "You're killing yourself," his doctor said bluntly. "I'm finishing what I started," Bumpy replied. There was truth in both statements. The sit-in and its aftermath had given Bumpy purpose in his final years, but they'd also accelerated his decline. Friends worried. "You need to step back, let others lead," urged Reverend Williams. "I will," Bumpy promised, "when I'm sure it will continue without me." He began training younger activists, James and others, teaching them strategy, negotiation, how to maintain pressure without losing community support. "The work continues after we're gone," he told them. "That's what matters. Not our individual contributions, but the movement continuing." It was the same lesson he'd learned fighting Dutch Schultz decades earlier. Build systems that outlast individuals. Create structures that can't be destroyed by removing one person. He was building his final legacy, not through crime or violence, but through teaching others how to demand justice. 1 year after the sit-in, the Harlem Oversight Committee conducted a comprehensive review of its impact. The results were mixed but encouraging. Surveillance of civil rights activities had decreased by approximately 60%. Files on law-abiding citizens had been reduced significantly. The Civilian Advisory Board had investigated 42 complaints and found merit in 23, but problems remained. Some officers ignored the new guidelines. Enforcement was inconsistent. The advisory board's lack of disciplinary power limited its effectiveness. "We've improved things," Bumpy told a community meeting, "but we haven't fixed them. That will take continued pressure, continued vigilance, continued willingness to act when necessary." He was right. The sit-in had been a dramatic moment, but lasting change required boring, persistent work. Attending meetings, filing complaints, documenting violations, holding authorities accountable day after day. "Revolution isn't one glorious moment," Bumpy explained. "It's 1,000 small actions by ordinary people refusing to accept injustice." The Oversight Committee continued its work. They became a model for other cities trying to establish police accountability. Delegations visited Harlem to learn their methods. Bumpy's role gradually shifted from leader to advisor. His health forced him to step back from daily activities, but he remained involved in strategy, helping younger activists navigate obstacles. "You've done what you set out to do," James told him during one of their regular conversations. "Have I?" Bumpy looked out his window at Harlem's streets. "The surveillance is better, but poverty remains. Police behavior improved, but inequality continues. We won a battle. The war continues." It was a realistic assessment. The sit-in had achieved specific goals, but it couldn't solve all of Harlem's challenges. Still, it was something, and sometimes something was enough. In his final years, Bumpy often reflected on the sit-in and its meaning. "I've done a lot of things in my life," he told a journalist conducting an interview. "Some good, some bad, some I'm proud of, some I regret. But that sit-in, that's something I'm completely proud of. No qualifications. We stood up for dignity. We won something real. That matters." The journalist asked about his criminal past. "How do you reconcile your history with your activism?" Bumpy thought carefully. "I don't know that I do reconcile them. They're both parts of my life. I was a criminal because the system gave me limited options. I became an activist because I learned the system could be changed. Maybe both came from the same place, refusing to accept being treated as less than human." It was an honest answer from a complicated man. The sit-in had given Bumpy's final chapter meaning beyond his criminal history. He wasn't just the gangster who fought Dutch Schultz. He was also the activist who challenged police surveillance. Both identities mattered. Reverend Williams visited regularly, and they discussed Harlem's future. "What's your hope for this neighborhood?" the Reverend asked. "My hope is that people remember they have power," Bumpy replied. "Not the power to destroy, but the power to demand respect. The power to force institutions to acknowledge their humanity. That's what the sit-in taught. Ordinary people can change things if they're willing to act." "And your legacy?" Bumpy smiled. "I hope people remember I tried to protect this neighborhood however I could. With strategy against Dutch Schultz, with dignity against police surveillance. Different methods, same goal, keeping Harlem strong." It was July 1968. Bumpy Johnson had only months to live, but the systems he'd helped build, the Oversight Committee, the Civilian Advisory Board, the culture of accountability, would outlast him. That was the real victory. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968, while playing cards at a social club in Harlem. He was 62 years old. Thousands attended his funeral. Not just former associates from his criminal days, but activists, ministers, teachers, and ordinary citizens whose lives he'd touched through community work. "He was complicated," Reverend Williams said in the eulogy. "A criminal who became an activist, a fighter who learned to use peace as a weapon, a man who understood that protecting your community means evolving as the challenges evolve." The sit-in remained his final great act, a perfect demonstration of strategic nonviolent resistance that achieved concrete results. In the years following his death, the tactics Bumpy helped pioneer spread throughout the civil rights movement. Sit-ins at police stations, civilian oversight boards, community documentation of police behavior. These became standard tools for demanding accountability. The 1965 Harlem sit-in is often forgotten in discussions of civil rights history. It wasn't as large as the March on Washington. It didn't have the drama of Selma. But it achieved something important. It showed how local communities could challenge police power through organized, peaceful resistance. 50 years later, as new generations fight for police accountability, Bumpy Johnson's lesson remains relevant. Institutions only change when citizens force them to change. Dignity must be demanded, not requested. And ordinary people, acting together with courage and strategy, have power beyond what they imagine. The gangster who became an activist left behind more than criminal legends. He left behind a template for challenging injustice, one that continues to inspire those who refuse to accept being treated as less than fully human. That's the legacy worth remembering. Not the violence, not the crime, but the moment when Bumpy Johnson sat down in a police station and refused to move until his community's dignity was acknowledged. That's the lesson that lives on. On February 23, 1965, Bumpy Johnson led a 25-hour sit-in at Harlem's 28th Precinct to protest police surveillance. His peaceful resistance forced creation of new guidelines limiting surveillance, establishing civilian oversight and protecting civil rights activities. The action demonstrated how community organizing and nonviolent resistance could achieve police accountability, a lesson still relevant today.